Hey everybody, it's Paul with reporting live from my sofa. How's it going today? I am actually recording this Monday morning and we're going to be going over Friday's testimony. So quick update, we got back from our little hurricane evacuation mode. We're at our new campground and the printer is out of ink, so I'm having to sit at my computer so that I can go over my notes. But everything was fine. We were very lucky to come back to just some trees being down, things like that. So I'm going to get out there and work on that later today. But we're so thankful, and I really appreciate all of y'all with your concern and checking in with me. That just really made that really nice, so I appreciate that. Now, like I said, we're going to be going over Friday's testimony, which was like a lot of the doctors and things of that nature. I thought this was really compelling to watch that day. I thought a lot of information came out. And so, without further ado, let's review. Okay, now like I said, I'm sitting at my computer and I'm going to be just kind of looking at my notes. I'll be kind of glancing down and whatnot. As you can see, it's a little bit of a foggy morning out there, but this view, y'all, we have an actual view of the water from here. I'll do a little video for Patreon people and put it on there so you can kind of see where we're at once I get more settled in today. But I love it! So anyways, let's jump into it. So Friday, what we saw is first things first, Dr. Brown got up there and was grilled for I don't know how long. I mean, I thought it would never end. So let's just talk about some of the key points that came up with her. She talks about doing the 2 sets of exams for each set of bones that were brought to her. The first time with the majority of them, and then that secondary time where just a few were brought in that they missed from the first search. Now, she points to the 3 skull fractures, but she is adamant throughout the whole time she doesn't know if those were pre or post-mortem, which is a huge, huge thing. I was very curious to find that out because those are big, obviously, things. You know, if it's like, nope, 100% this was the baby, was alive when this happened, well then obviously this is not good. So that was established. Now, one thing that was interesting in the beginning that she basically is talking about how she comes up to her conclusions is that she uses not only the autopsy but the police interviews, things of this nature, which is going to come into play later because there's some very damning information in those police interviews and interrogations and confessions and stuff like that. So some of the items that she said specifically that she used, she said that she used Brooke's statements during police interviews to conclude the cause of death. She used the parts about gurgle sounds, things of that nature. She essentially, if you go with Brooke's confession was false, well, she's using that false confession. If you go with it was real, then she's using her real confession. We still haven't seen the confession in totality, and I have opinions on it already, but I need to see that videotape completely before I can really go with that opinion. Now, she says that the cause of death is homicidal violence of undetermined ideology. And again, looking at all of the info from the scene, the interview, the anthropologist, all of its points to homicide, but the exact cause of death cannot be determined. Now, a lot of the times the state will ask what seems to be like rather obvious questions, like, have you ever had an experience where a deceased infant cries? Obviously, they're establishing this to go along with some of the things that Brooke said in her confession. Now, they start getting into some of the testimony about the anthropologist that they hired, Dr. Murray, and she works with this anthropologist, and that person could not determine if the injuries were pre or post death either. And this is where some of the important testimony about the burning of the body comes in. Now, she said that some of the areas around the ribs looked like thermal injury, but once they revisit the bones a little bit later and they've dried out, that's when she says, no, the bones have dried out, they were probably just wet, something to that nature. That I do not believe that there's any kind of thermal injury anymore. Now, the state also brings up some expert witness reports from the defense, and the medical examiner, Dr. Brown, still says that there's nothing in the report that changed her mind. She says that there was basically 4 opinions in that report. One of them was being that there was no sign of thermal injury, and I keep bringing that up because it's very interesting, and we're going to talk more about it when the defense comes up, because obviously they they tear that apart. But remember, that was a huge part of this case, and essentially that got out and into the press, and it was, mother burns baby up and all all the stuff. And it still is not completely settled, but as far as evidence is showing, they can't really say. I mean, if anything, all they can say is no, that didn't happen. But we'll touch base on that in just a minute. So let's get back into the points. Point number one is that there are no signs of thermal injury. And Dr. Brown she agrees with this and says that, there are no signs on these bones during the autopsy of thermal injury. Now, what they are trying to say is that essentially because Brooks said she tried to burn the baby, that's what it was. Basically, the skin, the baby's, that type part was burned. But again, we'll get into that later. Point two was remains show no evidence of traumatic injury. Now, the medical examiner disagrees and says she identified fractured skull pieces, but says she doesn't know if they are pre or post mortem. So, traumatic injury, there's that. I mean, I guess technically it's like, again, I'm not a doctor, I'm not one of these people, but layman's terms, when I hear that, I'm like, well, traumatic injury makes me think that that's something that leads to death, but if you can't decide if it's pre or post death, then what good is that? Point three, they're saying that the advanced state of decomposition, there's a lack of soft tissue that says no evidence of live birth. The point four was because of lack of evidence, it's not correct to say the child died of homicidal injury. And Dr. Brown disagrees because of other evidence such as the police interrogation and scene information. And again, that's going to come back to haunt her. So now let's get into the defense. The defense gets up there, and y'all, if you've ever been exhausted watching testimony, I mean, I was like, oh my gosh, will it ever end? Will it ever end? Now, I do think that the defense is bringing out some good points, but I just think that this particular testimony went on and on and on and on for so long that it was getting exhausting, and I think he just needed to reel it in a little bit to get his point across, but let's jump into that. So again, he wants to establish completely that, you cannot state that baby Annabelle suffered injuries prior to her death. And the medical examiner, Dr. Brown, is like, well, based only on skeletal remains, I can't answer that question, or something to that degree. You can't tell us if she was born alive or not. Based only on my autopsy, no. Now, the judge does something very interesting in here, and I agreed with it, where he says, Dr. Brown, if you're asked a yes or no question, the defense deserves a yes or no answer. Now, one thing that annoys me, whether it's the defense, the state, anybody, is when they sit here. Okay, first of all, they're obviously going to ask yes or no questions, but when the witness will not answer a yes or no question, they want to come up with a dissertation for each thing. And I understand that some of those things, because as a person, you're like, well, you're trying to paint me into this corner, and I don't want to be painted. But there's some of that, like some of this is just basic. You can't tell us if the baby was born alive, yes or no. Well, actually, don't give us more than that, because it's making you look shady. You know what I mean? Like, you've already answered this for the state. Just say yes or no. You know what I mean? Because you've already told the state that you can't. Well, just based on this, I can't. Well, that's, I get that. There's some times where it's appropriate to me to go into explanation, but again, legally, they're right. You have to say yes or no. Just go with it and keep going. Anyways. Even the whole email that was shown wasn't very flattering, but we're just going to, for time's sake, read this little one. So this is from Dr. Murray, the anthropologist, to Dr. Brown. And I'm just going to read this from the screen here. Susan, the prosecutor's office seems upset with me that I wasn't more definitive about the burning. But you and I saw what we saw. Those bones look so different from my July visit to my August visit. I told them with microscopy I might be able to be more definitive, but I wasn't asked to do that. Here's the second one. Apparently my report has definitely upset their apple cart, but it is what it is. I could not say at that second visit with a reasonable degree of certainty that those bones had in fact been burned. Could you have said that? This is another one. Not histology, but dissecting microscopy. If I had realized that it was so crucial to their game plans, I would have done it. I have a scope that I can take photos through. I do think that would clarify things in my mind. This is Dr. Brown's response. I also did not realize it was a crucial part of their game plan. If you would like to do this extra step and they would like you to do this, it is fine with us. Do you want to ask them if they want that to happen? Or would you like for me to talk to Russell about it? They have not called me about any of the findings in your report. Here's Dr. Murray's response. Whatever you think best. I'm happy to do a second exam and addendum to the report, but if I don't see it, that's what I have to say, which is why you see that it was my opinion when I talked to you guys that it appeared there may have been burning. It may have been burning. You and I saw how different the bones looked during the second exam. I ain't gonna lie to them, but I sure ain't gonna lie for them. Okay, this email exchange right here for me is so bad because this is what's going on. And again, so much of this, in my opinion, relies on when we see the confession tape in its entirety, not snippets, not all this little stuff like that. I want to see this because they're claiming, the defense is saying, this is a false confession and she was forced into this. She went with her same story like some numerous amount of times until she started listening to them and she was telling them what they wanted to hear. If that is the case and it shows that through her body language and stuff, then this is really bad looking for the state. Because essentially the state is, in my opinion, kind of making this up. Because this Dr. Murray, no matter what that confession is saying, no, there's no burn marks. And I kind of was like iffy about it when I first told you. And they're acting really upset about my findings. And, you know, when somebody says, look, I'm not going to lie for them, it makes you wonder what their demeanor was in dealing with her. So that's the part that I'm like, ew, that doesn't look good. So now further into this, the defense says, well, we never got that report. And the MA says that she never got that report either. And the defense establishes that Murray wanted to do a second exam to clear things up, but basically was never given that chance. So again, that's where it's also interesting, where it's like, well, we can put this to rest right now. Let's just do A, B, and C. But that never really happens. So again, it's like, well, why didn't you want to just get to the bottom of it? You see where I'm going with that? So if more evidence comes out of, well, this is why, or da-da-da-da-da, but you see what the tabloids did with that whole burning of the body thing. Now, I'm not trying to say that, you know, gets away from other things that were done, but that's, for me, if I hear a body was burned in the backyard, that's grisly. That's Chainsaw Massacre stuff. And so it really paints the picture. It's already awful enough. You know what I'm saying? It's already awful enough. So it doesn't need that grisly aspect to make it awful for me. The grisly aspect puts it into grisly. So that's where, for me, I need to see that confession tape, because if I see where I'm like, no, yeah, I believe her confession, I think it's true, then okay, I see why they're so big on this has to match or whatever. But if I see a sign of like, you know, they just got this girl to say what they wanted to, because this girl to me is very naive, very impressionable. So I'm very curious to see this. You know, so the defense goes into, you know, she was hired to do this, you know, to determine trauma, but she was never given the chance, and so on and so forth. Now, this is one thing that I think is interesting. So go back very quickly to Dr. Andrews and the fundal height thing and that whole drama over that, where, remember how Dr. Andrews was like, well, I always use the tape measure in my hand, that's just what I do, but the state's like, well, no, in the report it just says your hand, so that's what we're going by, that's the evidence, da-da-da-da-da. So, you know, we can't rely on what you said. Well, if you take that logic and apply it to this, which is, no, all the evidence says there was no burning of the body. I mean, none of the evidence points to that. Well, but Brooke says she did it, so, well, she did it. Well, to me, I'm like, it doesn't work both ways. You know what I'm saying? Like, it doesn't work both ways. So, you know, and again, it's a confession's a little different and things of that nature, but that's where I'm curious to see if the defense brings this up. Because I feel like, well, no, if you're going to be big on like, nope, only can go on what the evidence shows, and he wrote hand. You see where I'm going with that? So we'll just have to say. So then they go into Dr. Latham, who was hired by the prosecutors. Dr. Brown went over his report. She doesn't remember she got more than one report by him. Dr. Latham indicates in her report that there were no signs of homicidal violence, says that there's no trauma to the bones. She is a trained forensic anthropologist. And so then the defense asks Dr. Brown, like, well, why isn't Dr. Latham's report part of your conclusion, since you use so many other outside resources to come to your conclusion? And which I thought was a good question. Why didn't you attach her findings to your report? Another good question. She says our office didn't hire her, the prosecutor's office did, so she sent her findings to the prosecutors. defense is basically like, well, I gave you the report, so why didn't you say anything? So there's two things going on. And that we see this numerous times where the state has stuff that they're not really putting into their findings or giving to the right people. Now, what he's saying is, well, I gave you should already have this. So from me, I don't care if she sent it to you or not. And I'll say this. Here's my thing. I don't want to sound like I'm like, oh, I've made my mind up. I think that regardless of the outcome of this trial, there's a whole bunch of issues going on with Miss Richardson and family and whatnot, to add up to the events of that night. That if it turns out, if we could like see behind the the green curtain and all that and be like, oh wow, look, we see what happened and she's not lying, it's really true, there's still a whole bunch going on there that needs unpacking and some mental cleansing going on for there. There's a lot of bad mojo going on over there. I don't doubt that. But there's a vast difference when you start getting into accusing someone of burning a body and murder and this. You have to dot your I's and cross your T's. And so some of the stuff where I'm like, well, yeah, why aren't y'all giving these reports? If you're saying that, well, we looked at the totality of reports except for A, B, and C, then I'm like, really? Because if she's guilty of this, she's guilty and it's going to show. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's going to add up to that. So that's where I feel like dot your I's, cross your T's. Don't let, because we see this happen in times where there's other cases I've studied. The staircase, I always go back to this one, where I'm like, that guy is guilty of murder. I'm sorry, that's my opinion. And because the state got shady and used bad stuff and didn't do this and used this crappy, person to do the blood expert stuff, he's walking free. So that's where I feel like dot your I's, cross your T's to make sure that bad people aren't walking around getting away with heinous crimes. Now, also in this, Dr. Brown admits that Dr. Lathan says the fractures are post-mortem. And he says, well, why didn't you tell the jury that you can't tell when the report says the fractures are post-mortem? And so, this is just, he goes over and over and over and over this. And it does get to the point where you're like, honestly, I was just like, I am going to pass out here watching this. He goes back into the dark spots on the bones and says, well, that's because they were wet. Dr. Brown says, I'm not sure. And he says, well, didn't you talk to Dr. Murray about this? And she said they were wet, and then they were dry. Dr. Brown doesn't remember that conversation. So there's this back and forth like this over things. Now the defense goes on and says, well, because of that, there's a second search of the home and a second interrogation, which this is what leads to what the defense claims is a false confession. Now the defense goes and shows a bunch of video clips, and they're asking her from the interrogation, the second one, and they're asking her about like the fire, and she denies that, and she does act confused and this and that. But the clips, and I don't know who decided to do this, if that's what the state and them agreed, I don't know. They were very edited in small little clips, so that doesn't do anything for me, because there's other parts of that confession that I need to see to be able to be like, well, okay, that's fine and dandy, but what happened before and after these snippet little 1-second clips? Now the defense then goes into an email he sent her saying, well, look, is it even possible to hold a lighter to a baby and it catch on fire? And she's essentially like, well, I don't know, I never tried it, I don't know. He also talks about, well, how many BTUs are in a lighter? She doesn't know. How many BTUs does it take to burn a human body? She doesn't know. So he also goes into the aspect of, to get the evidence of a live birth. You didn't take into consideration Skylar's eating disorder, didn't ask an OBGYN about it, so on and so forth. Has her admit that, what Skylar describes is the description of a stillborn. He basically asks her what's confirmation bias. She doesn't know. He explains to her it's when you come up with an idea and only come up with, ideas like, we're going to only find stuff to support this idea. So finally, and that's a condensed version right there, finally he is done examining her. I think the son got up there, the younger one. It was like, sit down. Just sit down at a certain point. Because it was exhausting. It was a little much. He is dramatic. He is, this very, gotcha. And for this, but I'll say this, y'all, if you've watched different trials, this guy doesn't hold a candle to other things that we've seen, y'all. He's very calm. He hasn't done anything so far. He's annoying to me, let's be honest. He could kind of speed it up and not be so, I gotcha, about it. But, he's not being that horrible. I've seen way worse people out there. Way worse defense attorneys, way worse state attorneys. Now, the state state gets back up there again, and she establishes, look, you don't work for our office, you don't work for the police. She establishes that the doctor still believes that the child died by homicidal violence, regardless of when those fractures occurred. Establishes that regardless if the baby was burned, she still thinks that the child died of homicidal violence. Now, the state reads a transcript, and this is going to be huge for me. And basically, it's like when Skylar's dad comes into the interrogation room, and he says, well, they tell us you have to tell us what's going on because you're 18. And she says, I tried to cremate the baby. Now, the state alleges that this was done without any prior police questioning, so on and so forth. Now, real quick, you can see the dad sitting behind the table in this live shot, shaking his head no. So I'm like, okay. And the judge, I think, said something about that later. But what I find interesting about that is I'm like, that's bombshell evidence to me. If Skylar, without being prompted from anybody, one of the first things she said, I tried to cremate the baby, without ever hearing that from the police, that's very damning evidence as far as I'm concerned. That's where I'm going to be like, okay, wait a minute, hold up, maybe this burn thing, we need to look into it more. So that's where I keep saying I need to see that evidence for myself, because that's major to me. And if the state can back that up, okay, kudos to you. Let's roll with that. Now, one of the almost the last witness of the day, Dr. Latham, this is a forensic anthropologist, gets up there, reviewed the remains as well, says the bone measurements say the child was about 38 to 40 weeks, says the dental records align with 32 weeks to afterbirth 48 weeks. Didn't find any trauma that could contribute to the death of the baby. Goes over basics. No, the bones won't show if the baby was drowned. No, the bones won't show if the baby suffocated. No signs of thermal injury. Can't say if the skin was burned. She says that she came to the same conclusion independently as the defense expert did. She only sent her copy of a report to the prosecutor. So see, that's where some of this stuff, and you find the stuff that it's like, okay, these state witnesses, a lot of the state's witnesses, and when I say aren't working for them, with their theory of this is what went down, the state witnesses, it's not adding up for them. The medical examiner did a lot, but you saw where a lot of her stuff didn't quite, you kind of had to say, well, hold on now, wait a second. The last witness of the day, which y'all, honestly, I feel like, I wish the state had never put him up there. This is my thing. I don't care if you're the defense, you're the state, whoever. Paid witnesses are paid witnesses. They are professional witnesses. You cannot trust what they say. And that's just my opinion. I mean, they get up there and they're getting paid huge sums of money, and so is Dr. Brady. So let's jump into it. He's a state witness. Basically, he is there to refute a report by Dr. White, everything that this Dr. White found out. The fundamental height is not an accurate way to get age, says there's no evidence to suggest a growth restriction, says that the umbilical cord could break essentially if the mother's standing up and the baby just fell out, or say there was a motion of pulling the baby up like this, it could break off. They're trying to because remember, Brooke's like, there was no umbilical cord, I didn't have to cut it. So the state's trying to establish what are some other options here. Says that being white doesn't mean the baby's dead. Say we would never know how big the baby was because you need 2 points in time, and remember that because that's going to come back in a second. Establishes that according to what Skylar said, the baby was alive. And so then the defense gets up there. And the defense establishes that he charges $5,000 a day for court appearances. $5,000 a day. $500 an hour outside of that to do like the independent work and stuff. So he doesn't know how much they've charged yet. His secretary keeps his hours. Let's just look at the 8-hour video. That's what, $2,000 if he went over that. So you gotta look at when somebody's getting paid that level of money. I mean, that's like $10,000. Again, if you follow the Tim Jones Jr. trial with us, the paid for at testimony that they got up there, these people were making $20-some thousand to get up there and testify for him, and lying through their teeth. So that's why I say when you put this kind of money amount, you just can't trust it. And so I feel like I'm surprised the state used this, to be honest. Now, the defense gets up there. He shows this article that was written in this respected journal about how fundal height is used to determine growth restriction, and kind of unravels that a little bit. Now, he establishes that the state never gave him, meaning Dr. Brady. So the defense establishes that Dr. Brady never received Trey's testimony, the father of this child, that would have given about a 2-week period of gestation time. So because his testimony was basically we hooked up, I can't remember the months, but I think like the last week of July or first week of August or something like that. So there was this time where it was like, that's the incident, that's the isolated incident, there's your 2 points in time to be able to tell, oh, well, now you can have a measuring stick. And so that was a huge blow for me, because I'm just like, yeah, why didn't the state give that to him? Why wasn't that included? That's a major, 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 major. Were they trying to hide something? So now he goes into it further and says that with those 2 points of time, that he would have been able to realize that, yeah, this baby was essentially, had the growth restriction. It was a small baby or whatever. But again, if you look at some of the testimony up here, even the state, where they were saying, well, the baby was full term, things of this nature, but they didn't account for the size. I go back and forth with that, because I feel like that part of the testimony was messed up when they couldn't prove how Dr. Andrews measured the baby because of what was on paper. Now, another thing is that this doctor has said that he testifies for both prosecutors and defense, but then when the defense gets up there, he establishes, well, hold on, when you say that, you're talking about civil cases, not criminal cases. And he's like, yeah. And he's like, in fact, this is the first criminal case that you've done. And he's like, yeah. And so that's that slippery part of words where you're like, okay, yeah. When you get slippery and try to make things sound like what they're not, it just, it is what it is. And so he finished it with saying, have you heard of the Reed method? And the doctor's like, no. The Reed method, and I'm going to read the definition from the medical dictionary, a method of psychophysical preparation for childbirth. It was the first natural childbirth program, a term coined by Dr. Reed in the 30s. Basically, Reed held that childbirth is a normal physiological procedure, and that pain of labor and delivery is a psychological origin, the fear, tension, pain syndrome. I mean, that can go deeper or whatever, but the fact is that, okay, well, you would think he would have heard of that, being what he is. So for me that day, when I looked at it, a lot of information came out that led to these things. I have not made I have not made my mind up yet about her guilt or innocence until I see that videotape of her confession. If I went on the evidence based alone, I could not convict her of murder right now, because it just doesn't show in the evidence. Now, other charges I would have to see, because I still, like I said, there's a whole bunch going on over there when you hide a pregnancy. Do I think it's convenient that she didn't want the baby and it was born stillborn? Yeah, I do. I do. So, but unfortunately, if she did something to abort the baby on her own or whatever, there's just no evidence to show it yet. So that's where I'm like, I want to see her confession tape before I can completely be like, okay, this is what I am 100%, not 100%, but, I won't be able to think that till the end of the trial. So, again, I thought the state brought out good stuff in this day. I thought the defense brought out good stuff in this day. This is going to be a long video, y'all, because it's already 22 minutes, not edited. Oh, my goodness, I apologize. So that's it. I hope y'all have a great day. Thank you for hanging out with me. We're going to get into this week and get going. So y'all take care, and I will see you on the next video.